Hey everyone, sorry for the mix-up with the post about how to watch live. Still figuring out all the intricacies of using software with Facebook, and the software did not come through for us today, so I'm having to do a regular broadcast through the browser. And I also need to get my camera a little better framed. Someday I'll actually, do better lighting. But that's beside the point. So today we're continuing with our study of Ephesians, and in the live broadcast what I've been doing is I've been focusing on the element of spiritual warfare that is very strong throughout Ephesians, and we've looked at it in each chapter so far. And yesterday I preached on Ephesians chapter 4, and in Ephesians chapter 4 there isn't as much. Sorry, I got live television. I got to grab the Bible that I have highlighted in. In Ephesians chapter 4, there isn't as much that jumps out as obviously spiritual warfare language. And I think that actually is partly because of some of the things we were talking about yesterday or last week. So let me recap a little bit of last week just to make sure that we're all on the same page, and so you know what I was trying to get across last week. Basically, what we were talking about is the fact that Paul uses this language when he talks about spiritual warfare in Ephesians. He talks about the powers and authorities. He references them 3 times, and they are the ones that he is talking about when we get to the most famous spiritual warfare passage of all time, which will be Ephesians chapter 6, with the armor of God, when it says, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the forces of darkness and the powers and authorities, this present darkness. And what I wanted to point out, and I'm still working through this and what this really means, is that Paul's vision of spiritual warfare is not confined to these individual interactions with demons that we often think of. We often think of a spiritual warfare as, feeling a dark presence in a place, or having bad dreams, or feeling temptation, or a series of bad things happening in our lives. And I'm not saying that those are not valid. I'm not saying that those don't happen. What I'm saying is that according to Paul, that seems to be only one part of what happens in spiritual warfare and what it actually looks like. So those things very well may be real. If you have personal experiences with those, I'm not trying to say that that's not what's happening. What I am trying to say is that there is more happening than that, and that Paul, when he talks about spiritual warfare in Ephesians, he is talking about warfare with the powers and authorities, which in the Jewish mindset would be a distinct category from demons that oppress individuals. The powers and authorities are beings that have influence over large sectors of society, large groups of people. And so what we talked about last week was the fact that when we think of spiritual warfare in these terms, it changes the way we look at spiritual warfare. Spiritual warfare is no longer just about me and my struggles and the things that go on in my heart, but they're also connected with the things that happen in society. They are connected with big social events and changes and oppression of groups of people. In the Old Testament, they would have seen things that happen between nations as spiritual warfare. They would have seen the exile as an element of spiritual warfare. They would have, and so as we look at the influence of the powers and authorities in our world and in our own history, we're not just talking about that time that I gave in to temptation and I told a lie. We're also talking about that time that our country enslaved an entire nationality, or that time that we conquered an entire continent and herded the people who already lived there into reservations, things like that. And every country, every group, every nation has those stories of where we let our group interest and our group dynamic take over and lead us to do bad things. So the question then is, where I want to go this week, and what I see in Ephesians 4 is, how do we fight those powers? And credit where credit's due. This idea came out of a conversation that I had with a woman in our church named Bianca, who came in and posed this question to me. What are our weapons in that fight? And I think one of the things, and I'm not saying this isn't valid, but I've always felt uneasy with it, is sometimes we turn spiritual warfare into this kind of magic wizard's duel where we trade incantations and we trade prayers and and there's this, these exorcisms because in the New Testament, it doesn't work. Like, exorcisms in the New Testament are far less dramatic than we see in television or movies and that kind of thing. And what we end up doing is we take spiritual warfare and sometimes I feel like we make it almost cartoonish in the way we interact with spirits. Now, again, I'm not saying that that exorcisms don't happen or anything like that. They happen in Scripture. I'm not saying that people don't have interactions with demons and things like that. But what I'm saying is I'm saying that those kind of supernatural encounters and experiences that we have, by and large, historically, this bears it out. History bears this out. Those are the minority. Those are the far rarer instances of spiritual warfare, because, and what we've done is we've decided that that's all spiritual warfare is. But if you look in Ephesians, and if you read this according to Paul's understanding of what spiritual warfare looks like, you end up with a whole different category of weapons. Because remember, what the powers and authorities are trying to do is they are trying to pull humanity apart. They're trying to draw us to their power rather than God's. They're trying to unite us around themselves rather than our Creator. And so they want us to worship our nationality. They want us to worship our political party. They want us to worship whatever other part of our identity we might look to for power instead of God. And so we end up appealing to these other sources of power, and inevitably they divide us from other people. So if their goal is to divide us, to get us to give our allegiance to other powers, then how do we fight that? Well, I would argue that as we read through Ephesians chapter 4, we get almost a laundry list of weapons that we use to fight division, because it's important to recognize who the enemy is. The enemy are these spiritual and human political forces that cause division. So what does Paul tell us to do? In verse 2, he says, "Be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love." So, we have humility, we have patience, gentleness, and love. Okay, we'll start there. And I don't know, maybe this feels like wishful thinking, or I don't know what it is that doesn't land with this, but whenever I would read things like this, it never quite hit me as real spiritual warfare language. It was always like, yeah, you should be nice while you're waiting for God to sort things out, or don't stoop to their level. But I never actually saw these things as spiritual weapons. But when we understand the enemy, this enemy that we're talking about, specifically the powers and authorities, and their goal is to create division and to force us into giving our allegiance to other forms of power, these become legitimate weapons to fight against division. Because so much of our division comes from pride, comes from wanting to control power, to have the power ourselves, or to choose things on our own terms. And so humility is a legitimate weapon that we use to undermine the power of these authorities. Patience, gentleness, love, these are not just good ideas. These are not just buzzwords. They're not just nice thoughts, but these are actually weapons that undermine the power of these authorities. They are the only weapons that undermine these powers and authorities. Because the thing is, so often we try and fight the powers and authorities by playing their game. And the problem is, when we do that, we're just fighting one power or authority with another power or authority. We're still fighting. As soon as we fight their game, we have lost, because the whole point is that we're supposed to give allegiance to God and to seek unity under Him. We're supposed to seek unity under Christ that doesn't require that we fall into these other human parties that we invent. So of course, when we want to fight the powers and authorities, we form our own new parties that go out and do battle. But humility, patience, gentleness, love, these are the only kinds of things that actually can combat these powers and authorities. Paul gives us more as we go down into later in the chapter, starting in verse 25. He says, speak truthfully. We have honesty. He says, control your temper. Be generous. Let's see. Encourage each other. Then he says, be kind and compassionate and forgive. Every single one of these things that we treat as, we often think of as just nice things, good ideas, ideals to live up to, these are powerful weapons in undermining the powers and authorities in this world. Now, I want to give you I think the most obvious example is forgiveness. So imagine I have been hurt deeply by some person over there off camera. Okay, so what ends up happening is I hold on to all of this hurt and resentment and anger and all of these and hatred and all of these horrible feelings towards that person, and there is a breach here. Now, granted, in this scenario, they did something to me, but I respond with hatred, with bitterness, with anger, with all of these burdens that I ended up carrying, and they weigh me down, and they keep me from being able to have healthy relationships. I mean, anybody who's ever really needed to forgive someone, they know the weight that you carry when you are angry, and sometimes you're just angry all the time, and that is a powerful weight on your shoulders, and it can really dramatically alter the way you form relationships with other people. On the other side, that person, they may feel guilty, in which case they carry guilt and shame and a weight on their shoulders, or they may think that they didn't do anything wrong, in which case they may have feelings of anger toward me, or condescension. They may think I'm being ridiculous, but there's all kinds of things that are weighing on them. And that weight is power. It causes us to act in ways that we wouldn't necessarily act otherwise. It's a form of control, that these negative forces have control over me. I can't be genuinely happy because I've got all this bitterness and resentment. And when we forgive others, we are destroying that power. When we genuinely forgive, then we shed the weight that is on us. Perhaps we shed the weight that is on the other person. We tear down the wall of division that we built between ourselves. And forgiveness is an incredibly powerful weapon to oppose division. Because so often when there is something that, when someone hurts me, my reaction is I want to destroy them, or I want to defeat them. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is that just means we go around the cycle again. And I end up offending them, or I end up giving them a reason to be hurt. And then we go around again and again. And it doesn't actually get us out of this cycle, because we're still serving this power of anger and hurt and offense and rivalry and all of these negative feelings. And I don't want to. No, I do. I want to talk about the way we handle politics today, because I would argue that we are caught in this kind of cycle where we have turned offense into power. And so there is power in being the offended party. There is power in being the ones who have been hurt. And our anger and our hate gives us strength. It motivates our base. And so we just keep going around the circle. If one side is offended by the other, and they're offended by the other, and what we try to do in response is we try and defeat and destroy that other position, that other side. And that just doesn't bring peace. It doesn't bring unity. The best you can hope for is to destroy your enemy. That's not peace. That's just eliminating the opposition, or forcing them to obey you. But as long as we avoid forgiveness, we will never actually be able to find true unity. So how do we bring harmony? How do we undermine the powers? I very much want to do something about this negative atmosphere that we have in our country. And it's not just our country. In fact, in Great Britain, Parliament is having meetings specifically to try and change the way they talk to each other in Parliament, because things have gotten so bad. Now, this is Parliament in Great Britain, so they have very strict rules of being polite in Parliament, and so it's not like they're cursing at each other, but the rhetoric has gotten very, very negative and toxic, and they are trying to find ways to change the rhetoric. And I would argue that the only way to change those relationships and to bring true unity in a society is through forgiveness, kindness, compassion, generosity, encouragement, honesty, self-control, gentleness, love, humility, and patience. See, we look at this list and we think that these are frivolous, or they're I don't know, like they're a nice thought, but they're not practical. And so we turn to our practical weapons of the ballot box and campaigns and rhetoric and all these things that have never actually succeeded. When the truth is sitting right here, that these attributes that I just now realized I have selectively capitalized, but these attributes, these are weapons, and they are the only weapons that will win out in the end. That's why when Jesus came to conquer evil, he used these. These attributes describe Jesus and who he is. And the reason why he is the only one who can release us from the bondage of sin and hate and division and pain is because he brings this kind of power. And so I guess where I want to land this plane is to tell you that where you are experiencing conflict and division in your life, these are the weapons that you need to bring to bear. Whether it's a family division, a family conflict, a work conflict, friends that you can't seem to talk to anymore because of something that's going on, because you disagree on something. These are the weapons that you use to mend those relationships and to defeat the powers that are pulling us apart. And the thing is, a lot of times these are no fun, because we really like to win on our terms. We really like to be in control. We really like to stand up for our rights. We really like to win. And in this case, winning looks a lot like losing. These attributes look a lot like losing, but they are the only attributes that really will end the cycles of anger and hatred and division. And so I think that means as Christians, these are the things that we need to be known for. These are the things that we need to bring to politics. These are the things that we need to bring to our relationships. These are the things that need to define who we are. That's what I have today. Yeah, this is what I wanted to bring to you, because I'm very passionate about this idea that the gospel really can fix our divisions. Next week, we're going to be looking at Ephesians 5 and part of Ephesians 6, and we're going to be talking about the sons of disobedience again. I haven't decided exactly what the live broadcast will focus on, but it should be interesting because the sons of disobedience are just an interesting topic. So if you're local, we'd love to have you come visit us at Turner Christian Church on Sunday morning at 10:30. And either way, wherever you are, we'd love to have you join us for our next live broadcast next week on Monday at 3. So thank you so much for tuning in, and God bless.